This is now the third installment of how I became a targeted individual. My name is Troy Wolf. I'm going to be covering in this third recording the dates from 2011 to 2014. Today's date is December the 10th, 2018. And I guess let's get it started. I, Troy Wolf, do solemnly affirm that the evidence that I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. This is my now second attempt at doing this third recording. Obviously, I'm trying to shorten it down. They are getting quite lengthy, and I'm trying to stick to bullet points, but it's important also to see and recognize the pattern that is developing, and of course on this particular set of years, how things really spiraled out of control. Anyways, let me get this started. 2011. After I had fulfilled the lease of this individual's apartment, this person obviously went back and lived at their job and worked at this particular hotel. I was out bouncing around from motel to motel, and occasionally at times stayed at this Katie's hotel. Still under heavy surveillance in 2011. I got an opportunity early in 2011 to move into a house in Menasha. So of course I took the opportunity. Quickly living at this house, things began to disappear, especially from the garage area. Things stolen were gas, oil, and eventually the horn off my pickup truck. I had noticed as well is that the entrance to my house that I was renting was becoming more frequent and increasing. One day coming home from work, I had noticed that the washing machine had been used. To open the lid to find a huge grease ring around the tub of the washing machine. When I went to use it, the agitator was broke. Obviously the machine had been overloaded, and somebody thought, it's not mine, I'm not going to worry about it. I remember also coming home from work sometime in 2011 to be left a present in my toilet. Now that had happened on multiple occasions, 3 or 4 times, that they were leaving these presents in my toilet and not even bothering to flush them. Once again in 2011, yes, noticed the increase in people coming in left and right. Also in 2011, I began to have strange dreams while staying at this place. Dreams that were not mine. Examples were like places I had never been, parties I had never gone to, talking to people I had never seen or didn't even know. It was very interesting. Also in 2011 as well, I remember this because this actually started at the end of 2010, but into 2011 didn't pay much attention to it until all these issues were going on where I was living now. The comments that he started making, and one in particular has been sticking with me now for years. The mechanic stated, he doesn't have a clue what's going on. I remember overhearing this mechanic talk to other mechanics and coworkers that he doesn't have a clue what's going on. That went on subsequently for years. Like I said, 2011, I was sleeping very strangely. A lot of banging was going on outside the house. I'd get up to look, and I would see nothing. Eventually, at this house in Menasha, I had to change all the locks. I ended up putting up chicken wire on the basement window, on all of them, even though 2 or 3 of them the glass was missing out of, but I figured I better cover all the windows. Eventually I ended up putting a chain on the front screen door. Coming home from work one day, I had a table out on the porch, and it looked like somebody had taken a knife, a butter knife or something, and just started beating on the table. So of course I had to end up chaining the front screen door. In 2011 as well, this friend of mine from the hotel started coming over to spend the night. I think in total this Katie had stayed over in the years that I lived there about 3 times. What was interesting about every time this person had come over, this Katie, is that it was not only to spend the night and watch movies and this, that, and the other, but it was also almost like casing out this house, knowing all the closets, where everything was located, this, that, and the other. Eventually, at this house in Menasha in 2011, I ended up having to buy a camera system for the house. Interestingly enough, when I spent all the time installing it, hooking it up, getting it running, there were times I'd come home from work and magically it was turned off and all the videos that had recorded on it were deleted. 2011 as well, the phone conversations and the recordings of those phone conversations had stepped up. Didn't matter now who I was speaking to, family, friends, co-workers, talking to somebody about a bill on the phone. It didn't matter. All the yes and no responses were being recorded. I then began to hear later on in 2011, co-workers, they were saying as well, he doesn't have a clue what's going on. What I noticed back on the home front in 2011 is that the neighbors now were keeping an eye on when I would go to the grocery store, what I would buy. If I'd come back with a case of beer, they would comment on it. They would comment on me being out in the yard doing yard work, working on the vehicles in the garage, you name it. They would watch. I put a motion detector light on the back garage, and they would just stand out there and watch everything I was doing. So that was very interesting going on with the neighbors in 2011. It was interesting too in 2011, I had coworkers now coming up to me at my job stating about picking my brain. They wanted to pick my brain. They wanted to know what was in my head, wanted to know what was all about my life. And I found that very strange. It was almost like your life's too perfect. It can't run like this. Once again in 2011, there was a time I had lost my cell phone and I had dropped it out in the yard at work. A coworker, a good friend of mine, had come up to me and said, hey, that mechanic picked it up. When I went and confronted the mechanic, his basic response was, I never picked up any phone. I don't even know what you're talking about. I've never seen your phone. So basically a flat-out denial. Obviously, I had to replace that cell phone. Interestingly enough, later on in 2011, now you have the neighbors starting to comment at home. He doesn't have a clue what's going on. He doesn't know what's going on. Towards the end again of 2011, I had the mechanic, this rogue mechanic, come up to me and ask me about an IP address. He says, how do you find out what your IP address is? And I looked at him very strangely and I said, I really don't know. I haven't looked into that. Then he wanted to know about buying a mobile hotspot. He said, can you buy a Wi-Fi hotspot? Can you do this and that? And I just looked at him. I said, well, there's the internet. Do some research and find out for yourself. In 2012, and I remember this like it was yesterday, January the 6th, or in January, I should say, at 6 p.m. It was roughly around the beginning of January. I ran into an individual, obviously, this Stacy that I had dated back in 2003. This person ran into her at Walmart, and she was with a gentleman. She immediately points me out to this guy. She veers away. I went to this Walmart with Katie, and this is actually the Walmart over on Calumet Street. This Stacy disappears. Katie and I walk back, and at the time I was there at Walmart picking up a boot dryer. Katie and I walk back to the boot dryers. This gentleman follows me all over the store. We stopped back by the boot dryers, and he was standing right behind me. And this Katie had asked me, well, what's he doing here? What's this all about? Do you know this guy? And I said, I don't know anything about him. Obviously, I know he's with this Stacy, but whatever. He proceeded to follow us all around the store until we had checked out and left. And that was in January, around 6 p.m. In 2012. In March and April time frame, I remember going over to this Katie's hotel, and I had fallen asleep after a long day's work. I had fallen asleep and spent the night on the love seat. Um, that night in March, April timeframe, I was hypnotized. I recall it, that there were people standing around asking a bunch of questions of me, all the way up until the point of telling me to take my pants off. So I found that very interesting, that had happened. I, of course, woke up in a haze and thought that was really strange. That was this a dream, or was I actually, in fact, hypnotized? In July, one coworker, and I find this interesting, was let go of. And there was no reason to fire this individual. This person had been at the company already 3+ years. I was told basically when I asked why he was fired, they basically said he was lack of production. I remember one day I showed up at my mother's house, and she was sitting in one of her chairs in her living room. And as I came to the door, she looked at me. I sat on the couch. She looked at me and said, "Well, I guess we found out more than we wanted to know." And I looked at her and I got no explanation what that meant, and what she was even referring to. In 2012, that's when I also started noticing SD cards, little SD cards, were being passed around to not only the coworkers at Katie's workplace, hotel, but other people at my job were running around with these SD cards. Meanwhile, in the background, my mother and my younger brother, who's a firefighter, got into an argument. And I took special note of it because of what all was going on in my life. She kept commenting that, "Oh, your brother just keeps saying this is very serious, and it shouldn't be ignored, and this, that, and the other." I never got any details what that all meant. All I know is that they had this huge argument, and they had this go around for a couple weeks. Also in 2012 at the house over in Menasha, pennies began to show up everywhere. Cabinets, cupboards, closets, refrigerators. I had 2 refrigerators at the time. And it was very strange. You would pick the pennies up, and within 2 weeks, they'd show back up again. There were nights when I'd fall asleep and I'd wake up in the bedroom, and all of a sudden all you saw was a pink haze. It was almost like somebody had a dim pink light on, but it was really foggy, like somebody was also running a fog machine. It was very, very, very strange. Also in 2012, I began to notice that this Katie from my friend from the hotel began making this comment as well. "Well, he doesn't have a clue what's going on. Doesn't have a clue." In the fall of 2012, it's interesting, there was an event that had transpired where this Katie had gone out to dinner with a Chrissy. And this Katie and I would always sit and talk about having kids, this, that, and the other. It wasn't uncommon for me to go to Shopko or Target or Walmart, and I'd end up, rifling through, strollers and all sorts of stuff in the kids department. And that's when she was asking me about having a kid, and I'm like, once again, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Well, apparently this Katie had confronted Chrissy when they had gone out to dinner one night at a Buffalo Wild Wings about having a kid for me. Well, of course, that Chrissy came back and said, "Look, no, I'm not going to do that." Well, anyways, in 2012 as well, the phone conversations and recordings continue to become an issue with the yes and no responses. In 2012, this Katie decides to move into an apartment as close to me as possible to Menasha. And the closest place this person could get to was approximately 4 miles or so away from my house. This, in fact, is where I was eventually set up. I had come over on a Saturday. I had worked a hard week, Monday through Friday. And I had come over to this Katie's house. And I crashed on the floor. Within an hour, this Chrissy shows up with her child. She proceeds to set this child on a blanket that she sprawled out about 3 feet from me. I rolled over at that time to see both Chrissy and Katie leave the living room and head down the hallway to the bedroom. This child then turns and looks at me, doesn't recognize me, then turns and looks at the hallway that this child's mother had gone down, Chrissy, and begins screaming. I lay there just looking at the kid. The two of them come bolting back into the living room, and Katie had piped up and made the response, "What did you do, Troy? What did you do?" In 2012 as well, made a comment over the work radio. I was talking to another friend, and I said, "Do you hear that in the truck? Do you hear that?" The coworker piped up and said, "What are you talking about? You're talking about the cell phone in the truck?" And that's when I knew that that's how, at that time, I was being tracked and monitored and listened to in the truck. Once again, this Katie individual is making comments. He doesn't have a clue of what's going on. I remember one day I was over at my house in Menasha, and I was out mowing the lawn, and this is in 2012. A little girl on a pedal bike came up and stops right in front of me, in the front of the house. I stopped the mower. I had asked her, "Can I help you?" And she looked at me and said, "I'm telling on you," and pedaled her bike away. In 2012 as well, in late July, I ended up having a physical to renew my CDL. My FedMed card was going to expire. What I had subsequently learned is that this was Aurora out in Seymour, is that this wasn't the standard nurse that did my physical. This, in fact, was a traveling nurse. As I left my physical, you could overhear this nurse speaking to another nurse, commenting on the size and the shape of my junk. And I thought that very strange and odd. What was weird about that particular visit as well, to have my physical, is that she didn't bother to take my blood pressure until after she had, in essence, done my nut check. What ends up happening then is if your blood pressure is raised, they only give you 1 year on a FedMed card instead of the standard 2, which was forcing me to come back for another physical 1 year later. 2012 as well, I showed up at my mother's house in the fall, only to be rushed out of her apartment. At her dining room table sat a man and a woman, and they were having a conversation. She would not let me stay or let me in to the apartment. When I asked what was going on, she claimed that she was updating her life insurance policy. I remember a time also in 2012 when I went to Greenville. That was a community I worked and did routes on with this garbage company. I was getting coffee every morning out there at a coffee house. One morning I had noticed a cleaning company, they did industrial cleaning, showed up. They proceeded to take a stainless steel cylinder off the back of their truck and dump it into what looked like a stainless steel coffee mug. They then walked it over to the coffee house, gave it to the lady, buttoned up what they had going on with the truck, and they left. It wasn't that long after that I began to notice the coffee from this coffee house was terrible. Once again, my gums were burning, and subsequently from the 2 attacks now that I had had, one from a fast food place and this one, I had lost 3 teeth. What I noticed as well in 2012 when I began to frequent fast food joints, waiting in line, it didn't matter if it was on the fast food joints on College Avenue, Wisconsin Avenue, it didn't matter where they were. People would begin showing up and run inside. I noticed times when I was waiting extra long, it didn't matter if I was even just getting a drink, like a soda. I was waiting upwards of 5-10 minutes at the window to get my drink. Also in 2012 in August, the other friend that I had at this garbage company was basically harassed out of their job. When I inquired about that one as well, what I was told why he was let go of, well, he didn't agree with the company's direction. So we found it best that he just found a different job and went his own way. In August as well, I received now a text message on a work phone. They had handed out in the beginning of that year work phones to all of us to use in case we needed to call and report broken cans or anything about what was going on the route. But that particular day in August in 2012, I received a text message on my work phone. And it was a picture, not a message, with no return phone number, of my groin sitting in my car. Now, not knowing how to use this phone very well, I thought maybe the phone was in my hand, I had bent over to pick something up off the floor, maybe I had snapped the photo myself. But needless to say, I had received a message on my phone with a picture of my groin. What was interesting about 2012 as well, back at the house in Menasha, I had overheard a fight, an argument with the neighbors. The guy next door was just hounding his girlfriend or wife, stating, "You told him what's going on, didn't you? Didn't you?" And I remember her piping up and saying, I haven't told him anything. And then he'd yell, "Baloney, baloney, you told him what was going on." So I remember that as well. In 2012, once again, I continue to keep picking up all these pennies that I would find in my cabinets, drawers, and all over the house, even the basement, even the garage. I remember at one point in time, this Katie was picked up by law enforcement one day for the tint on her windows. And I know this because she came back and told me this. She said, "You know what the cop said to me? The cop said to me, 'We're going to let your friend's nuts go.'" And she didn't understand that comment. And when she told me about it, I didn't understand the comment. So I'm not sure what that even meant. What's interesting in 2012 as well is I ran into my youngest brother's friend from high school. I won't give this person's name, but he proceeded to stand there and tell me that, "Oh, your brother's a womanizer, and he has no problem taking a girlfriend from you, and that's why we really don't hang out anymore." Interestingly enough, in 2012 as well, I ran into my aunt, which is my father's sister, at a Walmart. And her comment to me out in the parking lot, Katie was with me at the time. She said, "Well, how you doing? You look fine." And both as Katie and I looked at each other like, "Wow, that's really strange. Obviously, what has someone told you?" So we just kind of brushed it under the rug and just kept about our business. In October, interestingly enough, after being estranged from my father for almost 10 years, he starts showing up at my job, leaving me notes to get a hold of him. And I hadn't talked to this guy for almost 10 years. A brief history about that is that my father was running a business when I came back from Vegas years ago. I started to work for him. That didn't work out. I gave my notice and quit. What had happened subsequently is he wouldn't stop hounding me. He was showing up at my house, at the time a girlfriend's place of employment, and wouldn't essentially leave us alone. We had an altercation, he and I did, and we basically didn't talk for going on 10 years. What's interesting too in 2012 is on the drive back from the landfill to the garbage company, you could hear coworkers on the work radio saying, "Shoot it, shoot it." It doesn't matter if you get right up behind them. You can't hit anything. It's not working. People were making the comment, "Pointed at his back, pointed at his back." And I remember that. I was always interested in trying to understand why people made it a point to drive behind me on the way from the landfill back out to the garbage company in Seymour. Um, this Katie kept telling me stuff like, well, you shouldn't have this easy of a job. And this was all happening in 2012. Katie would also make comments like, you shouldn't have as many cars as you have. No one needs that many cars. This Katie would also make comments about no one should make as much money as you make. Then also this Katie had made a comment one time about you should not own as much stuff as you own. You know, I remember time frames in 2012 when this Katie and I had, now obviously not having a relationship since 2006, 2007. We're just hanging out as friends and living together and whatnot. I got this impression, kept making references to my junk from this Katie. And almost like they were pissed off that there was no sex between the two of us. It's interesting in 2012 as well. I began to help out Chrissy. This Chrissy individual was a single mother. And I used to go over and help with, blowing the snow in the wintertime, fixing the car if it needed repair. And I had mowed this person's lawn a few times. So this Chrissy and I were developing kind of a friendship, which didn't seem to set very well with this Katie. In 2012 as well, I had bought this Chrissy and her daughter basically Christmas because they had no money to buy their own Christmas. It's interesting, one night I would spend hours actually over at this Chrissy's house blowing snow. We had gotten a lot of snow, and I was running around with this little snow blower. And I had spent all this time blowing the snow when I had come in just to get a cup of coffee. I remember this Chrissy making a comment to me. She says, well, what do you want for blowing the snow? And I just kind of looked at her and smiled, didn't say a word. As she went to walk away from me, she said, yeah, I'll fuck you all right. And I found that comment very strange and odd. So I gathered up my things after that time frame and left the house. It was also in the fall of 2012 that I find very strange. This Chrissy was given an award through her school, and the school is Fox Valley Technical College. I was also told that this person was getting some sort of an award for being a single mother and going to school. Interestingly enough, this Katie went to speak at this award banquet. So I find that a very strange coincidence or scenario that went on. Towards the end of 2012, I remember sitting out in my Jeep in the parking lot of this hotel talking to Katie, and Katie piped up and said, brought up the issue and comment again about having a kid. And once again, my comment and response was, well, if it ever happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. On to 2013. On January the 7th, I had finished my route in Center. I was asked over the work radio to come to Pulaski to help finish the route out in Pulaski. It was roughly 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. We were picking up all the trash out there, and that is when it all started. Blasting my testicles and thyroid, hour after hour, I eventually heard a guy pipe up on the work radio saying, "This is what I do." On January the 8th, I called in sick and went to the doctor over what had happened the previous day. I had a thyroid test and my testicles checked. Interestingly enough, I was sitting in a chair waiting for the blood draw for the thyroid. And a nurse spotted me and took another nurse around the corner. On the other side of the wall, I could overhear a conversation. One nurse was saying to another one, and that was all mumbling. The nurse piped up in response, and she said, "Oh my God." And the other nurse responded by saying, well, we were told to take it all. Interestingly enough, when I had my testicles checked and I complained and explained what had happened the previous day, the doctor left the room just laughing at my explanation. It's interestingly enough, too, that at my job, on that particular same day, I had an old friend from years ago that had worked that job. He didn't come back to work. He was also out there in Pulaski with me. And when he found out what was going on and the fact that I didn't show up the next day, he didn't come back to work. I remember on occasions in 2013 as well, I would be waking up at times with, with extreme thumb pain. I also remember at a time where I could visualize somebody over me pressing on my thumbs so hard, asking me questions, looking for particular answers. I remember this one time that they pressed so hard on my thumbs that it popped. And it sounded as if somebody was ripping a chicken leg off of a chicken carcass. You know, to this day, and this is 2018, I still do a thumb tuck. And I'm not sure if that's exactly where that started. Once again in 2013, around February, my father began showing up again at the workplace. Now he was not working at all. His business had been basically dissolved, and he was not working anymore. On March the 6th, I was blasted in the prostate 4 times on a Wednesday. 3 times on the way from my route to the landfill from Outagamie County, and 1 time leaving the landfill heading towards Freedom Community by Metro, which is based out of Little Chute. I remember that day getting blasted so hard I had actually stopped the truck in the middle of the road on County Road N and hopped out of the truck to call a family member to come get me. And this individual didn't bother to pick up the phone. That next morning again, I went back to the doctor. This time, I was complaining about the prostate. After being checked by the doctor had told me that yes, in fact, my prostate was inflamed. The following day I returned back to work. You could hear over the work radio a coworker commenting, "It's not good. It's not good." What's interesting about 2013 as well, the gentleman that had been making a lot of comments was the manager over all these coworkers. Began, making all these derogatory remarks. For example, Troy, they'd spent enough money on you, and also another comment about you aren't worth the powder to blow to hell. So interestingly, when I got hit the hardest on 2013, magically Affinity Medical Group, the same clinic that I was going to, started showing up out on my route, and were almost like monitoring from these Affinity Medical Group cars the events that were going on. 2013 as well, it's interesting, my father started showing up then at my house. What's interesting about all that is the days that I was actually hit the hardest and was the most wigged out and not knowing what had happened and what was going on, I'd get home, and within 10 to 15 minutes, he'd show up at my door. It's interesting, too, that my father starts making all these comments about me. You should never have any kids. You should never have a relationship. You should never be married. While he would sit on my front porch and drink beer, I was listening to all these comments. I remember also in 2013, he comes to me with a life insurance policy that he had carried on me since I was a kid and asks me to buy it. So I, of course, did. And he says, basically now, he says, you'll have enough money to bury yourself. Another comment my father had made is he, out of the blue, spoke up and said, your oldest brother, doesn't even know you anymore. I remember one day coming home from work in 2013, having been hit so hard, I was really frazzed out. I think that day also I had 3 energy drinks, so I was bouncing off the walls. He had showed up at my door, and I had let him in, and we were sitting there, and I explained to him what was going on, and he said, well, that's your schizophrenia, Troy. That's your schizophrenia. And I looked at him like, what? There was a night that he had come over, and he was drinking. And he had been over there for 4 or 5 beers. That night, under his breath, he makes this statement. Who's to say at what age people should die? Subsequently, on other occasions, drinking with him on the front porch, I remember one time my watch band all of a sudden was broke, and a piece of the watch band was laying on the floor. So what I was doing in the meantime, with everything that was going on and me getting hit, is I started taking, in 2013, how I was feeling, what the devices that were being run made me feel like. And this is how I came up with a website called peoplecookers.com. So I proceeded to print off that sheet. I passed one off to my father, who then took it to a friend of his that eventually came back to me and said, well, this sounds like it could possibly be radar. In sharing this page with other people, such as Katie and my mother, they looked at it and they were in disbelief that this was even possible. As time went on in 2013, I finally got my father to come work with me. I thought maybe somebody on the inside to what was going on with me would be of some help. Well, needless to say, it turned out to be no help. There was no inquiries, no questions, nothing that I could discern, nor did he ask any questions on what possibly was going on. He did manage to obtain his CDL while being with that company, but as for myself and what I was going through, there was no answer as towards what was going on. The only comment that he had made at one point in time was that he said, oh, I bet you'd like to kick the mechanic's ass, wouldn't you? It's interesting also going through that time frame and year of 2013. Once a month I was receiving a text message on this work phone. I would get a 7 to 8 digit number with no return phone number and no message, just the number. And every month this 7 to 8 digit number kept going down. On 4 occasions in 2013, I could hear what sounded like a big heavy door slamming shut, like a big heavy lead door closing underneath the truck. In 2013, I kept hearing comments about being turned from a hard kill to a soft kill. 2013, en route in a community called Belle Plains, the co-worker that I worked with up there kept running these devices and kept saying, this is a process. We go from one thing to another to another. During the year of 2013, I began to see a pattern developed. They would turn this particular device on at either 10 or 11 after the hour, switch it at 25 after the hour, 38 after the hour, 10 to the hour or 50, and once again at the top of the hour. It's interesting how during 2013, if you decided to eat or drink something in the truck when you were en route, the burning would get harder and harder with something in your stomach. In 2013 as well in Belle Plains, on 2 occasions, I was also hypnotized. I subsequently learned that there was a local hypnotist that lived pretty close to the gas station. and I would always wake up in a disarray. One time was actually at the pump at the gas station, and the other time was out on a deserted road in Belle Plains. In 2013, I overheard on the radio people taking turns and talking about it, about punching me in the guts with this device. And then the guy piped up and he said, well, that was rather uneventful. That individual's name is Grandpa Paulie. What's interesting, too, about the truck that I drove, because I drove the same truck every day, is in the morning when I'd come in, I'd find these broken zip ties sitting underneath my truck, where the devices from the previous day must have been strapped underneath my truck. All during 2013, I ended up blowing numerous electrical circuits in the truck and blew out 2 alternators. Eventually, that truck was relocated up north, and I never saw it again. I noticed one time when they had brought on board a new employee at this garbage company. When he showed up, they immediately escorted him outside, handed him a black smartphone, gave him the lowdown on what was going on, and then brought him back inside. I saw the phones on several occasions in 2013. Everybody in the company had one, except me. On 2 occasions, quarterly it seemed, when I would go to get my paycheck on a Friday, every employee was receiving extra checks on payday. Once again, when I inquired about what were they being paid for, I was basically ignored. One time, a comment out by the fuel pumps the manager made, he said, does he even know who this person is? And referring to a woman, does he even know who she is? In 2013 as well, Allegheny County Sheriff literally would drive right up alongside the truck day after day and blast the hell out of me. And a lot of times smiling as they were doing it. If for that day I was not in the community of Allegheny County, state police would show up and hammer on me. Interestingly enough, in 2013 as well, they would contact me over the radio, get me to talk, and then they would be blasting me in my thyroid and in my throat. I remember a time I would show up at this Katie's hotel after a day of hard work, and she'd walk right up to me and smell me to see if I was burning. And on a lot of occasions, I smelt like I had been burning. She would then get this Chrissy individual to walk up and see if she could smell it. It's interesting, some nights at this house in Menasha, I would wake up in the middle of the night to feel as if I was burning. Go to the front bay window of the house to see police sitting right outside the house. This was anywhere between 1 and 3 o'clock in the morning. I also came across an issue too in 2013 where this Katie friend had come over for a visit. What I found interesting is when she went to leave, she motioned to my next door neighbor the cell phone or phone symbol of your hand as she drove away. When I turned and looked, the neighbor was out on the front porch motioning that he would basically call her. It was interesting sometimes in the house too. I would overhear on several occasions computers rebooting and the opening Windows theme being played. One time I had done a test in the house where I would turn the power off. I would turn a radio on really loud and I would go sit in a closet. The next thing you know, you would heard people running around the house, putting devices on the house and in the closet where I was sitting. I kept this up. I kept turning the power off occasionally. Then you would hear some complaining going on, telling people to switch to still shot mode because the cameras in the house would only have a battery life of 6 to 8 hours. Interestingly enough, too, I started to notice the Wi-Fi connections. I began to pay attention to them. And I noticed, obviously, I never had any computer Wi-Fi connection in my house. But it's interesting when you moved into a community how there would pop up a Wi-Fi connection, and you'd keep an eye on it, on whose it was. Also, as well, in 2013, it was interesting to find that people would stand out in front of the house on their smartphones. In the middle of the night, I would wake up to go out on the front porch to find a guy standing right on my sidewalk on his smartphone facing the house. When I would confront this guy and tell him to leave, he would just simply walk across the street and stand on the neighbors across the street sidewalk and continue to do what he was doing. 2013 as well, I remember this, a guy in a green pickup truck in the town of Freedom comes up to my truck while I'm picking up garbage, stops right next to my truck and proceeds to mouth out the window of his truck, "Die, die, die." And on those occasions, of course, again, I was getting hit really, really hard. Still again in 2013, continuing, neighbors now directly across the street from me in Menasha. A kid was living there with a grandmother, would open up his upstairs bedroom window, screaming across the street at me, "Kill yourself already, kill yourself already." I began to hear conversations from coworkers and just basic people in gas stations and whatnot that I am a pedophile and I like messing around with kids in 2013. This Katie individual also had made some reference and comment to also liking animals. As well, in 2013, I had hopped in this Katie's car to find paperwork of her ex-husband's now, a pawn ticket basically for an Apple Air. And when she was confronted about this, she denied all of it. In the middle of 2013, and being hammered on so much at work, I decided to take a break from work, and I ended up having surgery to remove this lump that developed back in 2006 from Katie on my neck. Interestingly enough, when I was out of surgery, they never let my mother or this Katie know that I was done with surgery. I remember waking up in that room by myself. Then a nurse 10, 15, 20 minutes later came in, helped me get my pants on, and shuffled me out the door. What's interesting too about the surgery is a month after the surgery, a lump had now developed in the back of my neck, in my hairline. And it's still there today as of 2018. 2013 as well, blood would show up on my pillow, staying at this Katie's hotel. I had asked her about where the blood possibly on the pillowcase would come from, and she says, "You're doing it to yourself." I remember on times I was stopping at a gas station in Seymour before I headed out to route during 2013. I had noticed then again that the coffee began to taste very funny. As I was leaving the gas station on several occasions with my coffee, this worker for the gas station would walk over to the coffee pot, dump it out, and put together a new pot. I began to develop these ganglion cysts, I believe that's how it's pronounced, on my wrists. It wasn't until I stopped drinking the coffee that the cysts went away. I remember on occasions in 2013 I would get a Outagamie County private investigator that would ride in my garbage truck at times to pick up trash from suspected criminals and drug dealers. When this individual found out who I was, he no longer would ride in the truck. He would have me go down the street, pick the trash up, drive all the way back to him to drop it off. I was hammered on a daily basis in 2013, to and from work, either by Outagamie County or individuals that were following me to and from work. I remember on occasions I kept hearing about the mechanic, same individual, now messing around with my personal vehicles in the yard. For example, the Jeep that I was driving, a white Jeep, ended up becoming a one-wheel drive Jeep. By screwing around with the drive shaft in the pumpkin, he disconnected one of them, and now I've only got one-wheel drive on this Jeep. Also to a time when I found a SD card, not an SD card, but a SIM card from a phone, laying on the dash of my Jeep. At the time, I didn't even know what a SIM card even was. Interestingly enough, too, then, my convertible that I drove one day to work blew up when I went to leave, and needless to say, I ended up selling it to that mechanic. One time I had heard in 2013 coworkers talking about driving my personal truck around, and the manager of the garbage company had made comment to it on a few occasions. There were times in 2013 when I was drug all the way out to work in Seymour, a 25-mile drive, only to be told it was a snow day, now you can go home. I remember in the fall of 2013 a coworker piping up on the radio, refusing to participate anymore in this burning. I remember then hearing over the radio as well, he was being read the riot act and being told that he was going to be reported for not complying. Fridays in 2013 were always the worst. I was always hit the hardest. I don't know if that was to bridge the gap of Saturday and Sunday on the 2 days off. I'm not sure. 2013 as well. During the year, I heard a guy talking in my ear, weirdly enough in my Jeep, on what they were going to do to me. And then also he started making comments, I'm after all three of them, was a comment that was also now being made. Towards the end of November, my mother was involved in an absolute horrific car accident on Highway 41 in 2013. In December, I was actually in the waiting room of the hospital with my other brothers. We were having a conversation. I brought this story up and what had transpired throughout the year. And when I left to head to work, because it was early in the morning, my brother, the firefighter, comments to my other brother sitting there, yeah, I guess it's pretty bad. Now in 2014, and this is the last of this recording, in January in Belle Plains, my coworker pipes up on the radio and makes a comment and states this, oh, he's done. The pictures we have show that he has been burned down to the roots. In 2014, by the time I left the garbage company, over half the employees, interestingly enough, had knocked up their spouses. Also over the work radio in 2014, before I had left the company, I overheard a conversation claiming we have hit him over 70 to 80,000 times. On February the 14th, I quit the garbage company, leaving my father to work there. Interestingly enough, a coworker came up to me crying, literally crying, and saying he is so sorry. Within a month of leaving the garbage company, my father decides to quit the job because he was basically harassed out of the job. Excuse me, I need to take a drink. In 2014, after a visit from my father and drinking beer on my front porch, he leaves my house and you could overhear him talking to the neighbors, telling them, well, he'll be out of here within 3 months. Within 5 months of leaving the job in 2014, money was low. My now 401k was gone. Savings was gone. The life insurance policy I ended up cashing in, and I had been selling off any vehicles that I had owned. By the end of May in 2014, I left Menasha. moved everything that I had in the house and in one storage unit and combined them and put them all in one storage unit in Appleton. I ended up losing a lot of stuff. Interestingly enough, while I was moving everything, I kept hearing in my head comments that were being made on what people wanted and what people were going to take from me. In July of 2014, I went back to that same trucking company back from 2004, 2005, thinking things would be all better, that I had gotten away from the problem. Interestingly enough, that wasn't the case. This Katie individual, when I went back to work at this trucking company, took no interest in seeing my truck, didn't want to know what was going on, didn't care, and just basically stayed away. Once again in 2014 with this trucking company, they wanted to change the computer out in the truck. And again, in the middle of the night, a guy came to my truck and said that he had left his flashlight in there. He needed to see if that's where his flashlight was. When I opened the side compartment for him to look for the flashlight, he simply wrote the numbers down on the computer and once again handed it to the gentleman that was sitting in his passenger seat. Once again, 2014, I was being now tracked everywhere again. It was interesting, one time in 2014, I was in Maryland. A woman piped up on a CB and makes this comment. "This is what you get for fucking with a black baby," she said. I'm looking around trying to say, what is this all about? I don't even understand it. In 2014, I also, with the trucking company, kept seeing people leave my truck area. When I was in a truck stop, I'd come back to it. People were walking away from my truck with black boxes in their hands. I kept hearing on the CB comments about he's on a 20/40 split. To this day, I'm not sure exactly what that means. I remember in 2014, I had a Nintendo case propped up between the driver's seat and the cabinet behind me. What's interesting about that Nintendo case is it ended up developing a huge bubble in the plastic. In Chicago area, I was hearing about having to continue to exercise or start exercising in order to stay alive. I remember one day in New Jersey, I went to deliver a load of water from Maine. I was waiting at the dock. Another driver points me out to a dock worker and says the following: "That's the guy they've been hammering on. If all these people keep hitting him and something happens, there will be nobody to prosecute." As people passed me on the interstates and highways, they would do a cross across their chest before blasting me in my truck seat. Also, what was going on in Maryland is I would get a guy that would pass me in a car wearing a lab coat. He would press some buttons on what looked like a smartphone, pass me, the device would start, and then 20 miles further up the road, I would then repass this guy for him to come out and do it again. And we did this for, it had to be about 100 miles. And one trip down to Atlanta, I remember coming out of a truck stop and here a guy had slashed my front steer tire, a brand new tire. Needless to say, I ended up having it replaced when I had gotten down to Atlanta. But driving on a tire with that deep of a slash in the steer tire was a scary event. I ended up in the emergency room back home with so much pain. The doctor had replied to me, "You better quit smoking." What's interesting about that time frame as well is that my mother excused herself. And she also had a conversation on the other side of the wall, not knowing what she had said. I overheard a conversation between this Katie talking to another coworker at her hotel. The conversation went something like this: "Well, we did go to the police. The police weren't interested in doing anything, so we're going to do something about it." There was a time I had gone and had some dental work done. I believe it was in 2013, 2014. Interestingly enough, again, my mother was with me, and she pulled the x-ray technician aside. And all I heard from that conversation was the lady saying, well, don't worry, the x-ray doesn't go down that far, or we don't go down that far. In 2014 as well, my youngest brother was finally arrested, I guess, after quite the surveillance. And I remember getting a call from my mother. I had come over to her apartment with this Katie to find my mother's apartment in a disarray. My mother had turned to this Katie and said, do you think this has anything to do with? And the two of them shut up. I remember looking at Katie. She was shaking her head no. And my assumption is it was reference to me. The comments in 2014 kept coming. We're going to get them. We're going to get them. It's just a matter of time. This Katie individual in 2014 goes back to drugs. Now this is the years 2011 to 2014. This is my third recording. Stay tuned, obviously, for the fourth and final recording on how I became a targeted individual, where I'm going to cover issues such as a relationship that was sabotaged, the comment from a director at a plasma business, and the attempt that was actually on my life.